In the following video, I'll share with you why I believe it is that so many thousands of diabetics overcome diabetes by watching my videos. I get reports nearly every day from grateful viewers who tell me that they have dramatically lowered their A1C score as a result of applying some of the principles that they've learned from me. After getting so many of these glowing reports, I just had to sit down and figure out what I consider to be the 7 basic reasons so many people are finding such amazing success. Now, by way of introduction, I need to make a couple of quick comments. First, let me say that I know some of you are going to criticize me for using the word reverse in connection with diabetes. You may admit people can get their A1Cs down into the normal range, but you say that's not reversing diabetes unless you can eat a whole pizza, have a candy bar as a dessert, and wash it down with a giant Pepsi, and still keep the numbers below 140 or so. And if they cannot do that, you will declare they haven't really reversed their diabetes, they've just avoided it by eating far fewer carbs. But when I say people are reversing their diabetes, here's what I'm talking about. Suppose a man has an average A1C of 5.3 while in his 20s. As he reaches his mid-30s, his A1C is now averaging 5.9. And by his 40s, his A1C has drifted up some more and is in the low 6s. But at the age of 55, his doctor tells him he is diabetic and he has an A1C of 8.2. This man gets desperate, gets on YouTube, discovers my videos, applies what he learns, and within 6 months, he now has an A1C of 5.3, the same A1C average he had when he was in his 20s. Is that not reversing diabetes? He may or may not have completely reversed his insulin resistance, but he has surely reversed his numbers. Any mathematician will tell you that if you see a steady rise in glucose levels from your 20s through your 50s, then suddenly you drop right back down into the numbers you had while you're in your 20s, something has been reversed. So when I talk about many people reversing their diabetes, that's what I'm talking about. If you chart their numbers from decade to decade and year to year, and then suddenly those numbers plummet and go down to normal levels, there has been some kind of reversal. A second caveat I need to mention is that in most cases with these people who see amazing victories with their glucose levels, I'm not the only YouTuber that they're watching. There are a number of others that are saying pretty much the same things that I am, and a growing number of doctors who do so, which I'm not. Some will say that I was their major influence. Others will say, well, it was you, Dennis, and Dr. Fung, or you and Dr. Barry, or you and Dr. Sten Ekberg, or sometimes it was all of us together. So I'm not taking all the credit for their success. I'm happy to have done my little part. And I'm also happy that there are a growing number of others that are promoting healthy, low-carb eating and time-restricted meals. With that being said, my YouTube channel has helped a great many to beat the bully of diabetes, and being of the analytical sort, I finally had to sit down and try to sort out why this is. It's not that I'm totally surprised by these success stories. I could have guessed some people would be helped. But the truth is, I never expected it to be this many and from such an international community. I guess a part of it is YouTube's amazingly wide outreach. I never realized that people all over the world are watching YouTube, and diabetics seem to be increasingly turning to YouTube to see if they can find some kind of answers for the crisis that's threatening their health and their life. Here are a few comments left on my channel which certainly demonstrate the incredibly broad outreach that this little channel has. One person writes, "It's been over 6 months since I first came across your videos, and I'm happy to say that I went from a 6.9 to a 5.1 and lost a lot of weight. You opened my eyes in defeating diabetes. Now I know what to eat. Thanks again for the tips. I owe you my lifestyle." Another wrote, "My A1C was 9.1, and it's now a fantastic 5.0. My blood sugar that day was 424, and now it runs in the middle 90s. And I've lost 60 pounds just by eating a near-zero carbohydrate diet. Keep spreading the message because you and Benedicta made a difference in my life." Another person wrote, everyone with diabetes should watch this channel. In August, I was diagnosed with type 2 with an A1C of 12.5. I had no clue about it. I came across this channel and took all the advice. Today, at the doctor's, my A1C is 5.0, and my weight went from 320 to 259. I feel like a new person. Thank you for putting the info out there, and thank you for this channel. God bless you. And one more, this person writes, thank you very much. Your videos have done miracles for me. For years, I've been 11.6 to 11.3 as an A1C. Now this year, 10.0 down to 5.8 in 3 months only after watching your videos. I know now how to control diabetes. Please keep on making your videos. You are helping so many. I always recommend your videos to my family, friends, and people struggling with diabetes. Thank you, and God bless you. Well, I could go on, but I'll stop there. There's no doubt in my mind that large numbers of diabetics have become former diabetics, at least according to the numbers, because Benedict and I post videos from our upstairs little video studio here in Texas. And the question I want to answer on this video is why? Why are people finding this kind of victory? Especially considering that I'm not a doctor and I have zero medical training other than the books I've read and the things I've learned from a buddy of mine named Mike the blood sugar meter. I've come up with 7 reasons why so many are finding help. So let's get into them. First, I'm convinced people find victory over diabetes watching this channel because they learn they can see victory. Now that may sound kind of strange, but the truth is many diabetics conclude there's precious little they can do about their condition. They're just one of the unlucky ones who have mysteriously come down with diabetes, and about all they can do is take their meds and hope they can hang in there for a while until their condition sends them to an early grave. But when diabetics watch this channel, something happens that changes that thinking. Watching me interviewing other diabetics who have seen victory, hearing my lectures, and watching Benedict and me eat different foods and comparing the effect they have on our blood sugar, some of the mystery is taken out of this affliction, and a powerful conviction and emotion begins to grow within them, and this emotion is called hope. Maybe, just maybe, I'm not doomed after all. Maybe I could be one of those guys with a testimony of victory. And suddenly, when there was no motivation before, now there is. Often they start binge-watching our videos, and the more they watch, the more convinced they become that victory is possible. In fact, it's not just possible, it is likely. They go from hopeless to hopeful, and from unmotivated to highly motivated. A second reason I believe so many people find victory as they watch the videos on this channel is that I make things nice and simple. I'm all about results, not theories, not complicated concepts. If I wanted to drive from McKinney down to Dallas, there would be no reason for me to take 100 different roads and make 100 different turns. The best way to get to Dallas from McKinney is to get on Highway 75 and drive straight south about a half an hour, and bang, I'm in Dallas. Nice and simple. And that's how I approach victory over diabetes. Take the shortest, most direct path you can to go from an A1C of 12 to an A1C of, say, 5.5. Don't fool around with those side streets. Don't indulge in any sightseeing. Just get there as fast as you possibly can. And if you've watched my videos, you can guess the nature of that path. And that brings us to the third reason so many people overcome diabetes as they watch these videos. This has to do with a 2-pronged attack on your enemy: a low-carb diet and time-restricted eating. These 2 strategies are so highly effective that either one of them could crush diabetes all by itself in many cases. Some people find they don't even have to go very low-carb if they'll simply limit their eating to a 6-hour window and change to a medium-carb diet instead of a high-carb diet and drop all the sugar and the white processed flour. They do this, and lo and behold, they get to the promised land of an A1C in the 5s. And there are others that don't go in much for the time-restricted eating, but they slash their carbs dramatically and they find victory. So either one of these strategies is amazingly powerful at beating diabetes. But when you combine both of them in your life, diabetes has no corner to hide in. It should not be a surprise when your A1C starts plummeting. Of course it's going to drop. It would be almost impossible for it to do otherwise. If a guy is coming to attack you with a stick and you're carrying a machine gun in one hand and an assault rifle in the other, what kind of a chance do you think he has? And that's about the way things are when you get serious with significantly reducing your carbohydrates in the diet and limiting the hours each day that you allow yourself to eat. Diabetes is changed from a bully to a wimp. A fourth reason I believe so many men and women are able to reverse their diabetes has to do with my emphasis on using your blood sugar meter, and specifically using it to test how various foods and meals affect your glucose levels. Many diabetics rarely test their blood sugar, and of those who do test, usually they only test in the morning. But I've insisted from the very beginning of this channel that you need to be testing yourself after your meals to discover how high your blood sugar will peak. First, find out when your own particular blood sugar tends to peak, and for me, that's around an hour after my last bite of food, but it might be longer for you. Find out when your glucose peaks and then test yourself at that time after various meals that you eat. And sure enough, motivation will suddenly appear in your life. And what's more, I won't have to preach that hard to you. Instead of me telling you to avoid bananas, I can just say, well, you think bananas are good for diabetics? Fine. Eat a couple of bananas. Wait an hour or an hour and a half and test your glucose and see what they do to you. You'll change your mind in a hurry unless you've been so brainwashed that you're convinced that outrageous glucose spikes are natural and don't really mean anything at all, which is, if I can be a little bit blunt, one of the stupidest ideas anyone has ever had. People watch my videos, they start using their glucose meter this way, and they learn more from Mike the blood sugar meter than they ever could from a dozen diabetic dietitians. A fifth reason why people find deliverance from high blood sugar through this program, and I'm convinced it's one of the more important ones, is that people learn that sugar is not your only enemy. Almost every diabetic comes home from the doctor knowing that he really needs to avoid sugar, desserts, sodas, candy, and so forth. But that's about as far as they take it. And sadly, that's also about as far as many doctors and dietitians take it. Oh yeah, they might also tell you to avoid white bread and white rice and substitute whole wheat bread and brown rice for them. They'll say things like, be sure and eat healthy whole grain bread rather than white bread, and eat bran flakes rather than Fruit Loops and Cocoa Puff cereal. But what they don't tell you, and apparently have never even considered, is that the so-called healthy whole grain foods are almost as bad for spiking blood sugar as the candy bars and the white bread. Even whole grain breads and brown rice and potatoes, the natural starchy high-carb foods, are made up of chains of sugar molecules. They're not technically sugar while they sit on your plate, but as soon as you eat them, they end up in your stomach and they turn into sugar lightning fast. So whether you eat a donut or a couple of slices of whole grain toast, whether you eat cotton candy or a bowl of brown rice, whether you eat a slice of cake or a baked potato, the results are pretty much the same. The starchy foods are going to turn into sugar very, very quickly, and your diabetic body can't tell the difference between that kind of sugar and the sugar that comes from the chocolate cake or the Snickers candy bar. In both cases, blood sugar will spike like crazy. Many doctors and nutritionists will say things like, now, instead of eating a piece of pie, eat an apple or an orange. But for most diabetics, you're not gaining all that much in terms of blood sugar spikes. Sure, you'll get more vitamins from the fruit, but what good are vitamins if the food that contains them is sending your blood sugar into the stratosphere? Now, when diabetics learn this, and they confirm it with their blood sugar meters, it's like a light suddenly comes on. They realize that they're going to have to get far more radical in their dietary changes, and when they do, and they start seeing their glucose numbers drop like a stone, they get so motivated There's just no stopping them. They will keep at it until they go to the doctor for their next visit, and the doctor's jaw drops when he or she sees how improved their A1C score is from 3 months previously. I believe a sixth reason why diabetes find a reversal of their A1C scores while watching this channel is related to the diabetic community that is formed around this channel. They watch the testimonies, they read the comments under the videos, and they realize that they're not alone. And they hear so many men and women tell of how much they've improved that they begin to say to themselves, I think I can be one of them. And sure enough, in many cases, that is exactly what they become. So don't stop commenting and sharing your stories of victory in those comments. They not only bless me, they bless lots of newly diagnosed diabetics who are starving for some good news. Okay, I said I would share 7 reasons why diabetics are finding amazing deliverance while watching this channel. But before I give the 7th, and I believe the most important reason of all, I want to pause and share a few brief video clips from some of the people I have interviewed over the last few years. So, drum roll please, what was your next A1C 3 months later after you've been told you've got serious diabetes and high A1C, high glucose? What was the next A1C?
5.6.
5.6. What did you think when they told you that?
I cried. I cried. But I was over the moon. I was hoping to get 6 point something. 5.6.
As Dennis always says, and I think this is right, use Mike. Mike is possibly your best friend when you first discover it. Learn what you can eat, learn what you can't. Experiment with food, and you will, trust me, in a matter of weeks, maybe even a month, you will feel so much better. And once you start feeling better, you'll want to keep going with that feeling. And that feeling will drive you through. And then
during that 3-month time, did you get the feeling, I think I'm beating this thing. I think I'm winning. And when you went back the next time, 3 months later, were you excited? Were you just curious? What was your feeling as you went through those 3 months?
Yes, well, remember, because of your channel, I was checking my blood sugar with my meter. I was checking it constantly so I could see that I was doing better and better and better. And I was actually anxious to go get the next A1C run. And he got the results back real quickly, and he was thrilled. He was shocked and thrilled to tell me, you're now at a 4.9, from a 9.9 to a 4.9. He said in all of his years of practice, he's older than I am. He's in his 70s, I believe now. And he said, in all my years of practice, I've never seen that happen.
I was going to find out whether all this keto and low carb and everything I was seeing on YouTube was the truth, or if it wasn't. I had one shot at this, and I did not waver. And I knew that within 3 or 4 months, I was going to have the truth. And I did. My A1C went to a 5.8, and the doctor kept saying, how did you do this? She just kept going, how did you do this?
And the doctor's office called me 2 or 3 days later and said, doctor wants to see you again. And I knew my numbers were up, and I knew it was probably along the blood sugar line. When I asked her what my A1C was, and she told me 10, I about fell off the chair. By the time I was able to get back in for a follow-up, it was 13 days later. And I immediately started keto low carb, and within that 13 days, I had my sugars back to the normal range. My average was about 112. And he was really impressed by that just in that short amount of time. I had lost, I think, about 9 or 10 pounds during that 13 days already. But since then, my A1C, when I went back in just last week to have it checked 90 days after my original, I was down to 5.8, and my average blood sugars were right around 110, 108, 110.
Okay, we've made it through 6 reasons why I believe so many people are finding amazing victory over diabetes while watching this YouTube channel. Let me give the 7th. We Christians use the word calling frequently. We talk about our calling, and by that we mean the particular ministry God has equipped us for and called us to do. Now, non-Christians also use that term. You often hear the expression, "you missed your calling." But it's really a Christian term, and we consider that every single follower of Christ has a calling, some form of ministry that he or she is uniquely gifted, anointed, and called to do. In most cases, it's not preaching, but it will always have something to do with blessing people. Ministry is all about people, and it's all about the love of God. Now, I have to admit that the idea of me being called as a minister to diabetics was never my first choice. I wanted to be a Billy Graham, and God has used me in preaching and evangelism. But one of the great surprises of my life is just how determined God has been to push me into this ministry to diabetics, and how greatly He's blessed it far beyond anything else I've ever done. And as I've reflected on this, I'm convinced that this ministry to diabetics is a manifestation of God's great love, a love He has for all people. You know, many of the people that I've interviewed have not been Christians. Some have been Muslims, and many have been secular individuals that rarely gave God much attention. And I can tell you that it pleases me to no end to see God's immense love He has for all people. It almost seems like He's saying to the diabetics of this world, whatever their religion, or if they have no religion at all, come to me, taste and see that I'm good, and I care about you. Well, I won't bug you any more on this subject. I know some of you are gritting your teeth and saying, I wish you would just shut up with all this religious talk. But the truth is, I would be incredibly ungrateful if I did not give glory to the one who's really behind all these amazing testimonies. If you've been helped by this YouTube channel, I have to tell you, it's not really me, it's Him and His Son, Jesus Christ. In this next video, I approach the same subject as in the previous one, except from a reverse angle. In this one, I talk about why it is that many diabetics remain diabetics for years or even decades and never see any success in lowering their blood sugar levels. They end up believing that terrible idea that diabetes is chronic and progressive, and that their condition is bad now and will only get worse in the future. And of course, this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. One of the educational aspects of doing this YouTube channel is interacting with diabetics of all sorts. In many cases, I hear from men and women who've been diagnosed as diabetics in the last few months, and they're scared to death. But other times, people share that they've been diabetic for years and even decades. I find it amazing that people put up with diabetes for that long. Now, I guess I shouldn't be surprised because the old school thinking has been that diabetes never goes away, never gets better, and your condition always deteriorates as you go from misery to misery and from one medication to 2 to 3, and then to insulin, and then more insulin, and so forth. For years, the standard idea about diabetes is that this condition is chronic and progressive. Chronic meaning it's always present and never goes away, and progressive, which means it only gets worse and worse. It never gets better. But after seeing so many diabetics becoming former diabetics in a matter of months or perhaps a year, and getting their numbers down from double-digit A1Cs into the non-diabetic range, sometimes I think, why do people with diabetes just put up with it so long? Why don't they do something about it early on? In this video, I want to share the 3 major reasons I believe diabetics stay diabetics and never make any progress. And having identified these reasons, it will be easy to see what is truly needed to break the chains of this terrible affliction and find the awesome freedom of normal glucose levels and relatively low insulin levels. I know there may be some other reasons, but let me give you what I believe are the top 3. The first reason that diabetics stay diabetics for years and years is a lack of hope. Sadly, nobody, not even their doctors or dietitians, encourages them to believe they can do much about their situation. So they're fundamentally hopeless about their diabetes. They're just one of the unlucky ones who happen to get diabetes, and all they can do is make the best of it, take their meds, and hope their complications will come later rather than sooner. It's unfortunate, but what can one do? They don't make any serious efforts to improve their situation. They don't believe there is anything that they could do that would make much of a difference. Let me give you an illustration that most of us can identify with. Can you remember when you were a kid in school and in PE your team was on the losing side of a softball game? But I'm not talking about losing by 1 or 2 runs. Your team was really bad, and after the first inning the score was 7-1 in the other team's favor. Perhaps you tried to tell yourself you would make up for it in the second inning, but after the first 2 innings, the score was now 25-2. And suddenly you realized your team could not possibly win. But the problem is you still have 5 more innings to play. So you're playing in a lopsided softball game and you're on the losing side, and you know there's nothing you can do to change that. How does that affect you? Well, I'll tell you how it affects you. You give up. You start goofing off, acting silly. Your mind is distracted. You just go through the motions. You know you can't win. So why try? Sadly, that is precisely how some people view their diabetes. They see themselves as hopeless losers without any chance at all of beating this thing, and they make no serious efforts to overcome the bully that has attacked them. And so they go on as diabetics year after year, decade after decade, taking more and more meds, getting more and more complications until death finally claims them. What they've been told, which is that diabetes is chronic and progressive, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and their lack of hope has doomed them from the start. The second reason men and women go on in their diabetes year after year is related to the first one, but it's slightly different. It's a lack of motivation for other reasons. Perhaps they do believe they could improve their situation if they really put some effort into it, but they just can't find the will to get started. And things aren't so bad right now. Sure, their numbers are too high, but they feel pretty good, and the idea of making changes in their eating habits and their lifestyle is just too much to consider. Sometimes they'll say things like, well, life is just too short to deprive myself of all those comfort foods. I'd rather live a few years less and enjoy my life than cut out all my favorite treats and live a little bit longer. Additionally, no one is really challenging them to make the necessary changes. Not their doctor, not their dietitian, not their friends. Nobody is telling them to get radical and vicious in fighting back against the monster of diabetes. And so they might make a few mild token efforts, but they don't ever get serious about it. They're unmotivated, inert, apathetic, indifferent, and happy to be so. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Years down the road, they'll probably regret their foolish attitude, but for now it seems reasonable and their diet remains as awful as ever. The third reason that diabetics stay diabetics for years is simple ignorance. There's a scripture that says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." And that is surely the case with many diabetics. Some people tell you what you don't know can't hurt you, but in truth, with diabetes, what you don't know can maim and kill you. Within this category of ignorance, there are 2 major insights that people don't get and are totally oblivious of. The first insight that many diabetics are ignorant of, and probably the one truth that has set more people free than any other in connection with this YouTube channel, is that all carbohydrates, I repeat, all carbohydrates are problematic for diabetics, not just candy and sweets. Years ago, I interviewed a lady who'd tried to support her diabetic sister, but she had not realized the dangers of non-sweet carbohydrates. She read my book, and I later asked her what she learned from it, and she told me this.
My sister had been diabetic for many years, and I never understood the role that carbohydrates played in a diabetic's life. I thought if she didn't eat desserts, donuts, that kind of thing, that she would be okay. And when I read your first book, I learned what carbohydrates do. They just turn to sugar.
They just turn to sugar. And that, my friends, is the truth. Whether bread or potatoes or rice or cornflake cereal, all carbs and starches are made up of sugar molecules bound tightly together in chains. And once they're eaten and your stomach acids go to work on them, they just turn into sugar, as Linda said. And the sugar they turn into is every bit as much real sugar as table sugar. Let's imagine you own a bed and breakfast and a man like this tells you he wants to stay there for 2 weeks. He looks a little scary, but you need the money, so you provide him a room. But as he stays at your place, you find all sorts of items that go missing. Pictures on the walls, silverware, even some of your furniture starts to disappear. Finally, you've had enough and you kick this thief out of your bed and breakfast and demand he leave. But shortly after that, a sweet, pleasant-looking little old lady rents a room from you. She looks so nice and innocent. You know she's not going to be any problem. By this time, you've replaced all the stolen items. But strangely, as she stays there, you find once again things are disappearing. Pictures, furniture, pillows, light fixtures, lamps, everything seems to be disappearing. You set up some security cameras all over the place and you soon discover the terrible truth. This nice, sweet little old lady is robbing you blind. She's just as bad as that first guy. Well, that is just about how sugary candy and starches and grains work. The sweet potatoes and the whole wheat bread seem so innocent, so natural, so beautiful, you just can't imagine them having the same effect upon you as the chocolate cake or the donuts. But once you set up your security camera, which is Mike the meter, he tells you that they're all about equally bad. They're all driving your blood sugar out of control and sending it into the stratosphere. Sadly, you inform the starches and grains that, like the donuts and the chocolate cake, they must leave your house immediately. There is a second aspect of ignorance that is maiming and killing diabetics all over the world and guaranteeing that they stay diabetics year after year after year. That ignorance comes from the flawed science of the 1970s, a science which has been proven to be false, but which many doctors and so-called diabetes experts still stubbornly cling to as though it came straight from heaven. I'm talking about the idea that fat is evil, harmful, deleterious, detrimental, and the enemy of all humankind. Bad fat, nasty fat, evil fat, monstrous fat. Well, if you really believe this, of course, you'll cut the fat out of your diet, or at least cut it down so much that it's a tiny little % of the foods you eat. And if you do that, you will have to replace the fat with something else. We have to eat. So if we determine we're not going to eat much fat, we'll have to either increase our protein or increase our carbohydrates. There's no way around it. There are only 3 macronutrients: fat, protein, and carbs. And if you slash any one of these nutrients from your diet, survival instincts will kick in, and you will greatly increase one of the other 2. And in most cases, when people cut fat way down low, they replace the fat with carbohydrates, which is exactly what we saw with the food pyramid from the 1980s. Cut the fat, increase the carbs. Slash that fat, magnify the carbs. And that, my friends, is a huge problem for diabetics. And yet that is precisely what many doctors and dietitians will tell diabetics to do: cut the fat, increase the carbs, and by all means take your meds. It is a prescription for disaster. You will need more and more meds and eventually more and more insulin. What diabetics have been told is in truth the perfect storm for creating ever-deteriorating diabetes and the need for constant medication. Not in the hopes that you'll improve, but just to try to hold off the end for a while. Eventually, you'll succumb, but what can you do? After all, according to the experts, diabetes is a chronic and progressive disease, right? And as a result, diabetics stay diabetics for the rest of their lives. Given what they believe, given their lack of hope and their lack of motivation, there's no other outcome as long as they continue to live in the dark. The good news in all of this is that once we understand why diabetics stay diabetics, we can do something about these 3 factors, and the result is something I hear every day from people who watch this channel, and that is that diabetics can become non-diabetics according to the numbers. Now, the first factor that has to be transformed is the lack of hope. That's an easy one if you watch this channel. I do interviews with all kinds of people who have brought their A1Cs from diabetic to non-diabetic levels, oftentimes in a matter of months. And I also love to share stories of victories. On top of that, you can just scroll down the comments on my videos, and you're almost sure to see numerous testimonies of victories. Men and women who are former diabetics. When you see just how many people are finding victory over diabetes, hope springs up. Are you really going to be the only person who cannot see victory? Everybody else can, but you can't? I don't think so. Victory is possible for you, my friend. The second factor is motivation, and that is where my good friend Mike the Meter comes in. He will tell you when you're going in the right direction and when you're headed astray. He will compliment you when you make good food choices, and he'll rebuke you when you make bad ones. And if you don't give up on Mike, he'll steer you to a diet that works for you, and you will thrill as you watch your fasting glucose, your A1C, and your post-meal blood sugar numbers going down, down, down. Motivation? You will have more motivation than you need with Mike around. The third factor is ignorance, and that is quickly solved. Watch this channel. Watch lectures by Dr. Jason Fung and Ken Berry and Eric Berg and Sten Ekberg. And oh yeah, Mike can help with this as well. You don't need me to lecture you about starches. Mike will have a lot to say about them if you'll just give him a chance to speak with you about it. Before long, you'll come out of the dark and into the light. And if you bother to read unbiased reports and studies and research, you'll discover that fat, far from being your enemy, is actually your friend. As you cut your carbs low and embrace butter and ghee, heavy cream, fatty meats and fatty fish, nuts and avocados, you'll discover that the levels of fat in your blood, your triglycerides, will take a nosedive and leave you with far better numbers than you had when you ate little fat and mostly carbs. I know that's strange, but I hear it over and over again. More fat on your plate means less fat in your blood. So to review, the 3 reasons why diabetics stay diabetics are these. 1, a lack of hope that anything they do will make any difference. 2, a lack of motivation. And 3, ignorance of 2 major truths. First, that non-sweet carbs, starches, and grains can be just as problematic as the sweet carbs. And second, that fat is not your enemy. Now, if you eat both high carb and high fat, then yes, that can be a real problem. And that is essentially what the standard American diet involves. But as long as you keep the carbs low, you can raise the healthy fats high, and your diabetes will turn and run away from you like a scared chicken.